going out to the river was just always a place to calm down and just kind of take it slow and take it easy. And
from the river to the valley to the sea, all the places, all the people that you can meet.
Welcome to the Mississippi Valley Traveler Podcast. I'm Dean Klinkenberg, and I've been exploring the deep history and rich culture of the people and places along America's greatest river, the Mississippi, since 2007. Join me as I go deep into the characters and places along the river and occasionally wander into other stories from the Midwest and other rivers. Read the episode show notes and get more information on the Mississippi at MississippiValleyTraveler.com. Let's get going. Welcome to episode 18 of the Mississippi Valley Traveler Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to introduce you to a few people I met last year as part of a project I was working on to explore the many ways that we enjoy the Mississippi. This project was really just a beginning for me, a first step, I hope, as I collect stories about our relationship with the Mississippi, about what it means to us. For that project, I talked with 10 people who came from many different backgrounds and live all along the river's length, which was one of my primary goals. In this episode, I'm going to highlight 5 of those people. I'll offer a brief introduction for each person, but mostly I want to let them speak for themselves. The recording quality isn't always great. Sorry about that, but sometimes we had to meet in public places or record in less than ideal circumstances. Still, I think it's far more interesting to hear their stories from them directly, rather than to listen to me try to summarize their stories for them. Thanks to those of you who show some love through Patreon, including new supporters like Jude Duffel. Your support keeps this show going. Go to patreon.com/Dean Klinkenberg if you'd like to join the community of Patreon supporters. And if that's not your thing, you can show some love by buying me a coffee. I drink plenty of that. Go to my website, MississippiValleyTraveler.com/podcast to find out how. And now, on with the show. As I said last year, I had the great good fortune to talk to a bunch of people about why they spend time along the Mississippi. One thing that really stood out to me: the reasons vary a lot, and none of us knows exactly the same Mississippi River. I think that's fantastic. The Mississippi is a big river, and our love for it is just as long, deep, and wide as the river itself. Our perceptions of the river just need to catch up to its realities. In some surveys, for example, the image of the Mississippi that comes to mind first for most people is barges floating by. I sometimes get discouraged by that. As a people, we turned our backs on our big rivers over a century ago when the shipping industry stepped into the vacuum. Barges dominate so much of our images of the river because few other images get around. When the river got low last year and inconvenienced those barges, we heard about it endlessly in the news media, which created an impression that slowing down barges would create an economic disaster, which just isn't true. Maybe I'll get to that in another episode. Of course, when we think about the Mississippi, it's hard not to think of Mark Twain's river, of steamboats and epic raft trips. We still hold those images in our imaginations when it comes to the Mississippi. The thing is, the river has changed dramatically since Twain's days. We've changed the river dramatically. But while those images may dominate public perceptions of the Mississippi, especially among people who don't live near it or visit it very often, those of us who are blessed to spend time along the river consistently understand that there is much more to the Mississippi than barges and paddle wheelers of the past. And we find an incredible variety of ways to get meaning and enjoyment from time along the river. The river's scenic beauty is generally a unifying force. Most of us appreciate that part of being along the river. We can all get behind that. It's probably the main reason that a Facebook group that features photos of the river has more than 160,000 followers. But goodness, there are so many more reasons to appreciate the river. When I was thinking about this before I started the project, I came up with the following ways that I could think of that people enjoy the river: fishing, paddling, hiking, taking pictures, birding, boating, swimming. activities that help us improve our mental health or provide a break or help calm us. Art inspired by the river, painters, poets, etc. There's music inspired by the river. There are people who work tirelessly to monitor the water quality in the Mississippi. There are people who work to restore habitats along the river. Those are just some of the reasons I thought of quickly. One of the original goals for this project was to show off the diversity of people who engage with the river, and I'm really pleased how this part of the project turned out. I interviewed folks from the length of the river, and I managed to get 4 from the upper part of the river, 2 who live along the middle Mississippi, and 2 from the lower part of the river, and 2 more who I think kind of represent the river as a whole. You'll find interviews with men and women, about equal in numbers among this group, and I talked with people from a variety of racial and ethnic backgrounds. All of that reflects the variety of people who spend time and appreciate the Mississippi every single day. So ultimately, though, this was about showing off the many ways we engage with the Mississippi, and I think these profiles covered quite a spectrum. I'm going to highlight just 5 of those people in this segment of the podcast. And among them, you're going to hear people who write poetry inspired by the river, artists, people who are fishing, people with other connections to the river that inspires their art or their lives or provides a place to calm and relax. So it's an interesting group of river people, and I've barely scratched the surface. So let's get on to the first person. Native New Orleanian Jorge Abedin is a writer and student of literature. In the following clips from our conversation, he describes how he got hooked spending time along the river by going there basically to slow down and unplug, to relax. Then he mentions a couple of his favorite places in New Orleans, the Fly at Audubon Park and Crescent Park. You'll hear how the river has inspired his writing and a couple of short stories about unique aspects of life along the Mississippi River. If you want to hear one of his river-inspired poems, check out episode 13 of this podcast. And so here's Jorge Abedin.
On the Baton Rouge side, not the like Port Allen side, they have it spells out Baton Rouge along like the concrete levee kind of thing. And when the river's low enough, I went out there one night at like 8 o'clock at night just to kind of clear my head and just go sit out by, the water and watch the river and read a book or something. And these kids were out there and they were like just so excited, and they ran up to the letters and they slide down because it's really smooth compared to like the rock, and they slide down the B, the full length of the B. And I was like, whoa, like what do y'all do? They're like, look, you just like lean to the side and you just slide down. So you just, you zoom down and then you nearly fall into the water, and it's like just the most fun thing. So I'd always like take friends out there and do that. But Baton Rouge kind of during undergrad was just, because LSU was just so, kind of a all over the place kind of school, very a lot of partying, a lot of, social life going on. So and then also like I was in some pretty intense school. So going out to the river was just always a place to calm down. And, and I was like, I was an English major, and then this English and Spanish and like studying literature. So like it was just a great place to disconnect from campus and just kind of take it slow and take it easy and, enjoy the water, even though how, beautiful or ugly it was given on any given day, but always a really calming place. That spot at the end of the Fly, I don't know if you found the exact spot. It's like, when you like drive through, there's just like one little big plot of grass, and like for everybody in high school and like early college, that was like whenever you came back in town, everybody was always kind of sitting there bringing out a chair, like bringing out some food from one of the restaurants close by. And like I guarantee there's like 75% of people that were born and raised in New Orleans will say the same thing about the Fly. Like you just go out there and watch the tugs, and you watch the barges come by, and it's like just really. And then sometimes that's where when the river gets really low, there'll be those little sandbars right there too, and it's like you'll see people fishing, like you'll see just like some people really, getting into the water, like really enjoying it. And it's just, I don't know, just really fun to see like how, it can kind of go up and down and, people can really enjoy it different ways like that. There's one little bench like right outside of the pavilion that I'll always just sit there. And I used to bring like I studied a little while in Argentina. I'd bring my mate out there, I would bring a book or something, something to write with. Yeah, that's definitely one of the best spots. And then I completely agree. Just like the ruin, like the little like the train tracks, like Crescent Park is just fantastic. And then they keep up the other half of it so nicely, they really care about that part. But yeah, it is a nice little description of New Orleans of like ruin and beauty, coinciding together on the river. So the river just for me has always meant like just really meant opposites, it's like it means so many things that it means everything and it means nothing, it's like it's life, it's death, it's beautiful, it's ugly, it's clear, it's muddy, it's like I don't know, it's rough and calm at the same time. So it just kind of at that point, just again, like I said, means everything and it means nothing. So it's like whenever I was in a kind of a rough space, like remembering just that no matter how you look at the river, it's the river, like it's always flowing, it's always moving. It's at one point the lifeblood of the US, and at one point it's, just the lazy river, it's just like, so for me, like whenever I can kind of latch in on that and, remember that, it just really helps me write. And it, I think if in my writing, you can kind of see like the flow of the river is just pretty much all there is, like kind of like getting into your inner core and, just like remembering that just always, it's really inspiring for me. In my PhD, like the big thing that I really liked to study was, I got really into spirituals and gospel music of New Orleans, mostly like the standards. And just what would really, really inspire me was like those like the standards of like specifically the two I think of as I'll Fly Away and Down by the Riverside. And like those songs again have been like played for 200 years now in one form or another, and like what they've meant over time changes, but the words are the same. Like specifically, like and you see it in my writing is in I'll Fly Away to God's celestial shore, and it's like that image is just. And when I think about it, I think about Algiers Point, like sitting out there on the grass in Algiers Point on a sunny day, like a little windy on the river, a barge passes by and it's like, you're just content, it's like, this is God's celestial shore, whatever religious beliefs you ascribe to, like, it's like one of those moments where you're just like, this is it, and then in Down by the Riverside, I'm going to lay down my burdens down by the riverside, ain't going to study war no more. And it's just, and what that's meant for, the Dukes of Dixieland when they're on the riverboat, like playing Down by the Riverside, it means something different then than it did when, like during slavery and you're singing. I mean, think about how powerful that is. Like, I'll fly away to God's celestial shore as somebody that's enslaved. Like, that's just, the river just means something so powerful, in those senses. So I really like to see those changes and just that, how the music and, I guess that's all poetry, in a way too. But yeah, those handful of gospel songs have just been completely, subliminal, sublime, awe-inspiring. But it all goes back to the river, Every year, in December, when everybody comes in for, winter, we have two birthdays that line up on one of my friend's birthdays on the 26th and then one's on the 27th. So we always have this big party of like, blends into the other birthday. And at first it was like, we tried to make these like just really crazy fun plans, like go to a concert and do this or that and go to karaoke, I don't know, whatever. But it's kind of consistently turned into, we take the ferry across the river and go to Old Point Bar, go to the other, I can't remember the pizza place right there, Tav's. We go, we kind of just bounce around Algiers Point and then we take the ferry back, and like the whole night is kind of centered around being on the ferry with like 15 or 20 of your friends, and like, just the most fun, and then you go to Algiers Point, Old Point Bar, and you pack the place, play some pool, play some darts, and then come back, and then you got all the music in New Orleans too. But yeah, we pretty much center it around everybody meeting at the ferry station. And then again, people take that for work. People take it for, to get back home. So it's like you just have these people that are there every day. And then I don't know, people kind of forget how, cool it is that, we can just take this little public transportation is, on the river. But yeah, and then that area is also just one of the coolest things. I mean, that's probably the most indicative thing or the most descriptive thing of Louisiana and the river in general is like when I went to the end of the river, it's like we had to park like half a mile away, and then we had to wade through flooded waters, past the oil refinery, like past the old like the wrecked fishing camps to get to the actual end, because that's how Louisiana, that's the relationship between Louisiana and the river. It's whatever the river wants, the river gets. So didn't know if a gator was gonna like swim up to us and give us a high five on the way over there, but we had to get to the end. So
Hey, Dean Klinkenberg here, interrupting myself. Just wanted to remind you that if you'd like to know more about the Mississippi River, check out my books. I write the Mississippi Valley Traveler guidebooks for people who want to get to know the river better. I also write the Frank Dodge Mystery Series set in places along the Mississippi. Read those books to find out how many different ways my protagonist Frank Dodge can get into trouble. My newest book, Mississippi River Mayhem, details some of the disasters and tragedies that happened along Old Man River. Find any of them wherever books are sold. So next up, I've got a short clip from sculptor Florence Bird. Florence lives in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin, near the confluence of the Wisconsin and Mississippi rivers, in one of the oldest communities, one of the oldest continuously inhabited areas along the upper Mississippi especially. And in this clip, she's going to talk a little bit about that moment when she had the inspiration to create more than 24 sculptures that represented the people who helped shape of that area. It's a little funny that during my conversation with Florence Bird, my parrot had to contribute some, so you'll hear my parrot squawk a little bit in the background of this interview. So here, without further ado, is Florence Bird.
When I first got to Prairie du Chien and I was standing there by the Mississippi River, and I said, "This is the river of Mark Twain and steamboats and all of those things." So it was a magical place for me, and that's when I wondered who else stood here, and the confluence of the rivers. Actually, I think of it as a confluence of cultures here and historically, because it's really the only flat place on the Mississippi where you'd have a community like this, and it's just full of history and prehistory and mounds and everything. So no end of fascinating subjects. And then I see an article in the newspaper that there were pot shards found here from Cahokia, and then somebody found mastodon bones here, and then somebody reminded me that Father Mazzucchelli had the Catholic Church built here, and then it just went on and on like this, and I've got files and files of information on each of the people that I want in the sculpture park.
In December, I had a chance to talk with Corey Maria Dack and Sarah Lent as they stopped in St. Louis for a little rest and to warm up. They were long-distance paddlers who got started a little later in the season than many do, and they were about to paddle into the teeth of winter. And during this clip, you'll hear a little bit about their inspiration for why they wanted to do this trip, and then some of the fears about paddling so late into the season. Corey had previously worked on the river with Augustana College's River Semester, where she served as kind of a faculty member and guide for a group of students who explored the upper part of the river. And Sarah joined her just 10 days before we met to replace the person who had originally started the trip with Corey. They were both had kind of their own agendas for this trip, their own goals, and at the very least, it was partly to break the mold of who we think of when we think of long-distance paddlers, to be role models for women, for people of color, to create a new model for what it means to be a long-distance paddler on the Mississippi. They did finish their trip. They had to take some breaks when the weather got especially bad and especially cold in the wintertime, but they got right back on when they had the opportunity, and they finished the paddle and entered the Gulf of Mexico in early spring. So here is a few clips from Corey Maria Dack and Sarah Lent.
And on that trip, over the course of 100 days, we did Minneapolis to Cairo, and I found myself kind of thinking about the rest of the river, north of the Twin Cities and south of Cairo, and it just kind of felt right as time went by. I kind of thought, who might go with me, when might I do this? It was like a very natural, slow burn. This crazy desire I've had my whole life. It was an idea that kind of took seed, and I sort of nurtured it as I did other things, and the idea just kind of kept growing and kept growing and kept growing. And so I remember thinking, as long as I'm not winter camping the whole time. Well, joke's on me, because here we are. But I do think that as hard as it has been, and there have been some times that have been really, really hard, but the whole time has not always been as terrible as I feared, my greatest fears. Today we started to get sprayed with a garden hose, and it slowly turned up to a fire hose. By the time we got to fire hose status, though, we had like built upon skills to like receive the fire hose.
We felt good with everything we were getting in, yeah.
The Mississippi in her infancy is just, she's so pristine, and she's so gentle, she's so beautiful, she's fragile and powerful at the same time, and you want to protect her, but also she'll like kick your ass at the same time. And she just winds through, especially when we left at the end of August, so water was already pretty low, she winds through this labyrinth of wild rice beds, and there's rapids that you run through wooded forest. And you think like the wild rice beds, like we will never see that again. And I had known even just on river semester Minneapolis to Cairo, and I know further down, like what we saw in those first 55 miles, we'll never see again. So I felt so grateful.
I think what I've learned so much about it is like how much love there is for this river is what I think I've really taken in, because I would say I've been spoiled in my first 10 days, is where I've hopped on this trip, and even though it's December, we've had nice weather, we've had, almost no wind, just like the perfect weather you could ask for this time of year. Like so many days the river has been like glass and just like perfect paddling, but what we've had each night though and each day is just community along the river, is getting to meet different river angels and people that have taken us in and share their stories of why they're river angels or why they love the river, how they interact with the river, and just each night meeting more and more people who love the Mississippi River, who love the town they live in along the river, and who can share that with you, and having just a guide or like learning someone else's connection to it, and making me think back on my own connection and how I've seen the river, whether it's in Minneapolis or like I've taken a trip to like Itasca by myself once before, and seeing her when she's just you can walk across it, but never imagining it's always been, I think, if you grow up on the Mississippi, you maybe get in your head, like, oh, it would be cool to see the whole river. You learn that it's an important body of water to like this country and to people along it, but then just getting in this trip, seeing how important it is to individual people and why they love it. So for me, just seeing how much love there is for this river.
Because one of the missions and messages I bring is I want people of color to feel safe on the water, to feel welcome on the river, and I want them to see themselves in me.
The next one we'll listen to is Fiona Fordyce, who is a co-owner of Big Muddy Adventures in St. Louis. It's the only canoe outfitter in the area. They take thousands of people out on the Mississippi in canoes throughout the season, and one of the things they're known for is the quality of the meals they serve during their expeditions. Fiona is responsible for that. She plans the menus and cooks much of the food, and her culinary skills were featured in Feast magazine article last year, which was really nice to see. Well-deserved praise. Fiona also grew up on the Missouri River, so in the clips that I'm about to play, you'll hear a little bit about what she remembers from her childhood years growing up along the Missouri, and then some of what she's seen people experience when they get out on the Mississippi, and some of the surprises that they experience. So here's Fiona Fordyce.
I grew up right on the Missouri, so I've always been, like, since I was a little kid, we were paddling on the river. Oh, we were tossed in the river as babies, yeah, just take the inner tubes down to Pelican Island, go like arrowhead hunting, and then continue on to Sioux Passage. So it was really fun, and didn't seem scary or dangerous at all. Yeah, I mean, everybody thinks of the river as just completely polluted and toxic and something gross, but I think that Big Muddy in the last few years has done a great job of really changing people's perspective about that. Oh, I think the sandbars are what impress people mostly. Like, oh my gosh, this is like a beach, and and then one of us will hop in the water, and everybody thinks like, oh my god, I had no idea you could, swim and hang out on the beach, and so yeah, probably the swimming is what surprises most people. That and that it's pleasant and it's warm and it's not gross and toxic and smelly, and people are like, this is like Caribbean sand here, right in the middle of St. Louis, and nobody has any idea that we have like nature in St. Louis, so
close.
And in the city, so no, that's really neat. For me, it's more fun. I like going on the river on my own, but it's even more fun to show people this thing that they didn't know was there. And it's like, aside from the repeat customers, everybody leaves saying like, oh my god, I had no idea this was here. And one of my big goal for Big Muddy this year is to do more expedition trips and to market them to people who aren't from St. Louis, so to get people to come to this area for just these trips. We do this trip called the French Corridor Expedition every year, which is from the Arch to St. Genevieve. And every year before this one, it was always a real ragtag group of 2 or 3 people would sign up, and they're friends of ours anyway. But this year, for the first time, the trip sold out, and I think there were 4 different people who flew from the coast to St. Louis just to do this trip. Wow. And I thought that was so cool that people would fly to St. Louis for a trip. And I think that would be such a good thing for the city and for the river and for to have coastal people recognizing the Mississippi as something cool. When I was working as a tour guide in Alaska, I met this Spanish guy, Diego, and he owns a tour company in Spain where he organizes, groups of Spanish people and brings them on like adventure trips all over the world. And so I talked him I was like, hey, what's actually really cool? Everybody in Spain has, been to New York or LA, but I was like, the middle of the country has a lot of cool stuff too. And so I organized this Mississippi River trip that they all flew into Chicago, and we just in a van went to St. Louis, Memphis, Natchez, Louisiana, and I kind of sold it to them as like this, cultural trip, and we like ate a bunch of barbecue and listened to a bunch of blues music, but they all like really loved it, and they felt like they had discovered this, like, because all of their friends again had been to the more popular tourist places, but they thought they were kind of like discovering this heart of America thing. And turns out one of the people who was on this trip was one of the lead journalists for this like big newspaper in Madrid, and wrote this whole article about like the Middle America and the Mississippi River and like the culture of the river, and I was like, wow, like that's so cool. Like they were all so impressed by that trip. The Amazon is a huge attraction. Like people like fly to South America to see the Amazon, like fly to Europe to see the Danube, and like it's kind of nice to see finally like the Mississippi competes with those rivers for sure, easily. So it is sort of weird that it's just been like mismarketed so terribly. I mean, especially in St. Louis, like I just like that we have this really unique outdoor rec opportunity here. So yeah, and it's just like so close to the city, you can feel like you're far away and in nature, and I just think that's it's so neat. And I mean, just the scale of them is so impressive. Like they're huge rivers, and
River folks are happy, eager even, to share their stories about what they love about the Mississippi River. But sometimes it's not always obvious who has a story to share. I was hanging out at my favorite coffee shop a while back and talking with another regular, Jamal, about this project. I mentioned that I'd been talking to people about the ways they engage with the Mississippi and had been amazed at the variety of stories I'd heard. He smiled, got quiet for a moment, then he shared a story from his own childhood about going to the river. And that's how he ended up being one of the featured people in this project, just a coffee shop contact. His stepfather used to take him fishing on the St. Louis riverfront, just downriver of the Poplar Street Bridge. Jamal was about 7 years old the first time they went, which kind of began as a way to get to know each other better. But Jamal's memory of those experiences went far beyond bonding with his stepfather and learning how to hook and fillet a fish. The St. Louis riverfront is lined with a tall concrete wall to keep high water out of the city's neighborhoods. In the area where Jamal and his stepfather and brother fished, the wall had been covered with graffiti, not by rogue taggers, but by artists invited to cover it as part of the city's annual festival called Paint Louis. When Jamal first saw those works of art, he was astonished. He'd never seen anything like those paintings before. He credits those trips to the Mississippi River, those moments of wonder wandering in front of the art on that wall, with catalyzing his own interest in art and a career as a creative person. He's a musician today, with one of his career highlights being getting to perform in Carnegie Hall as part of a choir. Today he's working with a music collective called Kinfolk. In the following clips, he talks about those childhood memories of time along the Mississippi River and how it inspired his interest in art. Here's Jamal Hodge.
He took us to get our fishing, our fishing equipment. We got our poles. He taught us how to actually put our lines in there. He taught us how to find worms like bait. He took us to the Mississippi, and I'm like, what is this? Never been at this point. He taught us how to descale them. He taught us how to get the bone out of them. He actually taught us how to fillet them too. That was my first time working with a knife as a child. Had a little pocket knife, and he was like, all right, this is how you do it. I hated deboning and descaling the fish. Yeah. Worst thing ever. I was like, nah, you do that. I hated it, but it taught me how to properly cut a fish. Could I still do it? I'm out of practice, but I probably could. I think it's kind of like riding a bike. I think if I got back to it, yeah, I probably could. He eventually taught us the trick of catching the fish. He would tell us to look at the water, watch the water. You'll see when they come up. You'll see them pop up, and then all of a sudden
Little.
you'll see the ring of the water, the ripple, and he's like, they typically are in the same area doing that because they're looking for food, and then they come up. If there's food at the top of the water, they come up. Aim for that. Cast into that spot. And be patient. He's like, be patient and watch. If you just pay enough attention, you can see. Once he started doing that, I started catching fish more often. But yeah, a lot of lessons learned. Fishing will teach you patience for sure. It was the most peaceful I ever saw that man ever. Like, not saying he was not a peaceful soul. He was a pastor, so not saying he wasn't a peaceful soul, but he was at ease. Yeah, when he was fishing, he was at ease. You want to learn someone. There's two ways to learn someone. Building IKEA furniture with them, okay, and then going fishing with them. Those are the two best ways to learn a person. Being with him, not only did it teach me patience, but it also taught me to be observant. When it came to being at the Mississippi River, it basically just taught me to observe my surroundings and be present. Because when you're fishing, you have to be present. Like, you're there. It's just you in the river. That's right. It. I think that was the most time that we spent together outside of like being at home. Was either fishing or like hunting, but mostly fishing. I think I fished with him more than I hunted with him. And I learned who he was as a human. I got to see him as a human, not just my stepfather. And that was something beautiful that he like gave to us. I think for that whole year we went like maybe like once every like other week to go fishing in the Mississippi, and those are like some of the most prominently like memorable moments in my childhood. And you see that you drive down there and you see this large wall of just graffiti and art. And this is my first interaction with graffiti. Like I loved art at this point as a kid. I was already falling into music. I was falling into painting. I was falling into drawing. Like I loved art at this point. And then he take us here and you see this large, amazing wall full of just dope and beautiful art. And I'm in awe. I'm captivated at this point.
It just goes on and on.
And it just goes on and on forever. It's like the first thing that I remember of going to the Mississippi. To this day, that is the main reason I started doing art. And, like I do not consider myself an artist, but I do consider myself a creative. That is one of the key starts of me becoming a creative and wanting to learn something and being passionate about learning something. It triggered that for me. I don't think I was passionate about learning anything at that point. Like I was a child, obviously, right? But that is the key point that made me want to become a creative. And to this day, I am still a creative. I'm a musician. I make music, but my art drove me to becoming a musician. And at that point, I realized that there was so much that could be connected in the world. And realizing that at a young age opened my mind up a lot. And that would have never happened if I would not have went fishing at the Mississippi River.
Well, those are just a few of the voices of people who told me about their connection to the Mississippi. As I roll out the rest of the profiles via social media in the next couple of weeks, you'll hear from a few more people, including a river angel, the man who started a Facebook group to show off pictures of the Mississippi, a young man who fishes along the Mississippi partly for the challenge, but also partly to calm and level out, a conservationist who specializes in birds and is also a top-notch musician, and a Native American woman who founded a group to protect and honor our precious waters and has walked thousands of miles to do so. The Mississippi doesn't belong to any one of us or to any one industry. It's our river, all of ours, and these stories help to shine more light on all the ways that the river matters to us. I'd love to hear from you. Why do you enjoy spending time along the Mississippi? What's your connection to the great river? Drop me a note at MississippiValleyTraveler.com. And And now it's time for the Mississippi Minute. The news media has been feeding its voracious appetite for stories about tragedy and drama with a steady stream of reports about flooding along the upper Mississippi this spring. I don't want to downplay the hardships that high water can create for some people, but I have to admit that I feel more cynical this time around about the media coverage. In the last 3 or 4 decades, communities along the upper Mississippi have made a lot of effort to reduce the risk of monetary losses from spring flooding, usually by moving housing and development out of the floodplain. This spring, we've seen higher water than usual in some places, which is due mostly to a deep snowpack that melted relatively quickly. This created a surge in water flowing into streams that, barring consistently heavy rains, will fall almost as quickly as they rose. This is a normal process. Still, much of the land underwater this spring consists of public parks, places that were set aside from development to accommodate those predictable annual increases in flooding. One dramatic picture I saw making the rounds in the media was a stone building next to the river that was surrounded by water. I know that building. It's a bathhouse on La Crosse's Pettibone Island that gets wet often and will clean up pretty quickly with a hose and a mop after the water recedes. Not exactly the face of tragedy, no matter how dramatic the pictures look. There are some houses facing threats, but they are mostly in places that see high water frequently in the spring. And in the past 15 years, I can think of several times that the baseball stadium in Davenport has been surrounded by water, and it's made national news every time because it's a compelling image. You'll see plenty of pictures of that baseball park surrounded by water again this year. Now, the people who live in these areas that flood periodically are accustomed to dealing with these fluctuations in the river. The owners of the baseball stadium have their own process for dealing with high water. None of this is a tragedy. This is normal life along a river, especially a big river. And when we crowd rivers by building homes and businesses in areas that have flooded for millions of years, the costs and inconveniences of dealing with high water are ones we've created for ourselves. Spring flooding is as natural a variation, as much a part of the cycle of life, as leaves changing color in the fall and coming back in the spring. Let's get over the idea that these natural processes are disasters. Thanks for listening. I offer the podcast for free, but when you support the show with a few bucks through Patreon, you help keep the program going. Just go to patreon.com/Dean Klinkenberg. I'd be grateful if you'd leave a review on iTunes or your preferred podcast app. Each review makes a difference and helps other fans of the Mississippi River and the Midwest find this show. The Mississippi Valley Traveler podcast is written and produced by me, Dean Klinkenberg. Original music by No Offense. See you next time.